George Kambosos may be officially washed. What's going on YouTube? Rax here back with another video. And after watching the George Kambosos fight earlier this morning, we have to seriously ask ourselves some questions about this guy. Now, George Kambosos fought Jake Wylie this morning, Saturday, March 22nd. The fight did happen in Australia. That's why it was in the morning for us. But, overall, the card was pretty good. It was a pretty big event out there in Australia since we know, they don't really get too many major boxing events, plus it was hosted by Matchroom, so the card was on their zone and the production of the card was, top tier, the No Limit card that happened with Keith Thurman 2 weeks ago in Australia, that production was pretty good and whatnot. But, obviously, everybody's more familiar with, the Matchroom format of presentation. But the fight that I want to talk about is the main event, in which George Kambosos beat Jake Wylie by unanimous decision. Obviously, that's kind of the result that we expected from Kambosos. You know what I mean? With him, having that experience in his career, facing top dogs and whatnot. Jake Wylie came into the fight on short notice, and the guy hasn't even went 8 rounds with an official opponent. The guy that's the longest he's went, 8 rounds, in a fight. So for him to come out on short notice and go for 12 rounds with a former unified champion in Kambosos, that's a pretty big deal for him and his team. And after the final bell was rung, you could see him and his team raise their hands up like that was a victory in itself. You know what I mean? Now, wait till I tell you the part that, blew my mind. Jake Wylie was able to hurt Kambosos a few times, and he was able to land a few good shots on Kambosos. Okay, so how can I structure? Now, the real question after seeing all of this is, was this Wylie's performance or was this Kambosos' performance? And in my honest opinion, I feel that this was more so because of Kambosos. Now, obviously, I think, after the Haney loss, the first Haney loss, fans kind of written off George Kambosos. You know what I mean? We know what he has to offer, and we know what he goes out there and does. You know what I mean? After the first Haney fight. After the second one, he was written off for sure. You know what I mean? But, after more fights we've seen from him, as I explained in my previous video, the more fights we've seen from Kambosos, the more people are starting, he's starting to look bad. You know what I mean? Ever since the Teofimo Lopez fight. You know what I mean? And as I explained in my previous video, this has been going on since before the Teofimo Lopez fight, where he barely beat Mickey Bay and he barely beat Lee Selby. Now, one of the biggest problems for Kambosos, in my opinion, is his defense. Now, he has a hybrid Philly shell looking type guard where he keeps his right hand up, like close nearby his chin, but his left hand is always like low, like it's so low that it's to the point where it's below his trunks, type low. And his main defense, like his number one option, in my opinion, is head movement. He tries to move his head. He does give you a little bit of head fakes while he's in there, but for the most part, he's always going to move his head. That's his main form of defense. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with moving your head, but the problem is it normally doesn't work out for him. And we don't really even see him attempt to, utilize the strengths of having a guard like that, because I've seen fighters like Devin Haney use a guard like that. Obviously the most popular one, Floyd Mayweather. You know what I mean? Obviously, when you use a guard like that, the number one thing that you're looking for in terms of defense is the shoulder roll. You know what I mean? But Kambosos kind of moves his head, and for the most part, he'll move his head and then he'll like clinch, or he'll put his head down and he'll clinch. And, there's nothing wrong with that. But we obviously seen how that went against top level, high championship level fighters, in which he got outboxed and just completely picked apart. You know what I mean? I will say though that when he does face southpaws, he does keep both of his hands up, which shows me that, he knows that in an open stance matchup, you have to keep both of those hands up. You know what I mean? That's like the main problem that I've seen. The second problem is obviously the power. Kambosos really didn't have power at 135 pounds or lightweight. So moving up to super lightweight or 140 pounds doesn't really help that at all. And I think we've seen it today. You know what I mean? I think we've seen a perfect example of it today. He was able to land bombs on Jake Wylie in those first 5 rounds. And Wylie got rocked pretty bad in the 5th round. But after that, I mean, he got stunned a little bit. Like after the 5th round, people were like, okay, this may be a corner retirement, type of fight. But after that, he was able to hit Wylie, but, the power wasn't really there. He didn't really hurt him. So that leads you to my third and final problem with Kambosos, and that's stamina. Is there maybe a stamina issue going on here? You know what I mean? Like, is that the problem? So there's just those 3 main problems with George Kambosos. I mean, the fourth one, his punch selection. He likes to, we kind of know the combinations we're getting with Kambosos. He likes to throw that jab and then come back around with the hook with the lead hand. He likes to throw that, I'm doing it with the wrong hand, but he likes to throw that left hook out there a lot. And it got to a point where people, I was watching the fight, comments on like a Reddit thread, and everybody in the thread, they were saying he was like spamming the left hook, but he likes to throw that left hook a lot, but something that I think is that's overlooked about what's not in his game is his lack of body work. I felt like if he was able to utilize some body work, he would have been able to get Jake Wylie out of there. You know what I mean? But especially because he hasn't really gone 12 rounds. It seemed like when the fight passed that 8th round, it seemed like Kambosos should have really, tried to take control and get him out of there. Because he doesn't have that experience. But overall, Kambosos let him kind of stay in the fight, and he let him stay in the fight, and it was actually a good fight. It was actually a good fight, and nobody expected that. You know what I mean? And Wylie even won 3 or 4 rounds. You know what I mean? In my opinion. So obviously after that, the real question is, what's next for Kambosos? I feel like Kambosos, for him, I feel like if they can get him in there with someone like, a name that I've heard gone around, obviously we have Richardson Hitchens, but another name that I heard going around this week was Jack Catterall. I feel like the Jack Catterall fight will be a cool fight for Kambosos. I feel like it will be a cool fight. Both guys kind of sort of do the bare minimum to, win rounds and whatnot. So I feel like that fight right there will be a good fight for both of them at this time in their careers. You know what I mean? I feel like that will actually be a good fight, and I'd much rather see that than Richardson Hitchens fight, because that Richardson Hitchens fight, I don't think we need to see a repeat of Kambosos versus Haney. You know what I mean? Because come on, man, nobody wants to see that. Everybody knows how that fight will go, but I think the Jack Catterall fight will be a great fight for him. There's a few fighters that, Kambosos can mix in well with, but I don't really want to see him face any champions, right now. Another name that popped up in my head, Jose El Rayo Valenzuela. That's a good fight for Kambosos, you know what I mean? Because Valenzuela just came off of a title fight loss. But Valenzuela is with PBC and Kambosos with Matchroom, so we all know how that works out. But for the most part, that's kind of all I have to say about Kambosos' performance today. Let me know if you guys liked the video by dropping a like and leaving a comment. And I will be back with some more fight recaps or card recaps for the other fights that are happening later on today. Peace out, guys.